Hi everyone, good afternoon. Thanks if you've joined us and if you've hung around for this. Up next, as I mentioned, we've got a session looking at private 5G, but before we start that, I'd like to thank all our sponsors who make today possible. So we're looking at the rise of private 5G networks, and I'd like to hand over to our moderator, Mike Conradi. Mike, over to you.
Thanks very much. Oh, this is working. Great. I'll just wait for our guests to switch so they're sitting under their photos. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Conradi. I'm the co-chair of the International Telecoms practice at DLA Piper, which is a big global law firm. So I am not an engineer. I'm a lawyer, and I do bear that in mind when I make lots of mistakes and ask silly questions. Now, unfortunately, Jennifer has had to drop out of the session, and so Jerome and Ellie and I are planning to have what the organisers call a fireside chat. So the idea is we'll chat about 5G networks, but if anyone in the audience has got something they'd like to add, do stick your hand up, now or at a later stage. Before we get started, though, I think I'll ask both my fireside chatters to introduce themselves and their business. So, Jerome.
Hello. Hi, I'm Jerome Hewlett. I am the Chief Commercial Officer of Mangata Networks. We're a new startup on satellite communications, delivering high throughput with low latency. I will have to say up front, I'm a commercial person. The majority of my career was in investment banking, probably about 30 years of this. So if we want to get into technical details, we're going to have to pass it over to my colleague over here, the one that has hair.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eli Hanna. I'm the CEO of Tampnet. We are the largest offshore operator in the world, so we cover the sea. We own a network in the North Sea, fiber network overlaid by 4G, 5G, line of sight, microwave. Now we introduced low orbit satellites as a backhaul, maybe Mangata in the future, when they launch their satellites. We also own another network in the Gulf of Mexico. Each network covers 250,000 square kilometers, like the three times the size of the UK. We own a network offshore of Canada, Trinidad. Now we're going into Mexico, Brazil, and Middle East. So yeah, great to be here. And I'm an engineer background, so I can answer technical questions. I spent 25 years in Ericsson before joining Tampnet.
Okay, thanks, Ellie and Jerome. So I was a bit surprised to be asked to lead a session about 5G at ITW, because I've been coming to ITW for, I don't know, 13, 14 years. And ITW, I always think it's about long-distance, wholesale, fiber-based telecoms. So I think it's quite notable that 5G is making it onto the agenda. What are your thoughts as to, is it relevant to the audience that typically comes to ITW? Why is it on the agenda here?
5G is, having it here just makes a lot of sense. Having the telcos here with the fiber and the investments that they've made, being able to extend that services to areas that could use that service is just the next step. From my standpoint, fiber can't get everywhere, so that's why a satellite company is sitting up here. But I think 5G, with all of the technologies that are being created today, you really need that platform to be able to utilize and take advantage of those new technologies that are being created.
Yeah, I think when you talk about private 5G, with 5G, obviously you can go as a macro network. That's not what we're discussing here. And then also as a private. And when you go in the private setup, every single industry needs to digitize in the future. Some of them came before others. And what 5G will enable, it will enable use cases, some that we know about, like AI, like virtual reality and all this. Some of them we don't know yet about. Remember when 4G came in, Everyone asked, why do we need 4G? 3G is enough. But then 4G enabled Facebook to go mobile. 4G enabled applications like Uber to exist and other applications. So 5G is just starting. We already see just some use cases. The other use cases, honestly, you can do with private 4G. But I believe that putting 5G in a private setup where you have very low latency, very high throughput, will enable innovation and will enable new use cases to be born.
Look, thanks, Ellie. You've touched on something else I wanted to cover in our fireside chat, which is, bearing in mind I'm a simple lawyer, I've never really, and I guess lawyers we're quite conservative by nature, and it takes a lot to get me excited about a new technology, and I've never really been that persuaded about what's exciting about 5G. All of the use cases seem to be a long time in the future, or maybe even just not very persuasive at all. And the only exception to that I have encountered is private 5G networks. Where I was reading about, I think it's the port at Hamburg, where they've set up a private network that controls lots of autonomous vehicles and you need the very low latency, and you need the other property and the reliability that provides, and you can do it in that kind of environment. So private 5G networks for that kind of use seem to me to make sense. But I'm interested in whether you agree with me that as of today, that's about it. Does 5G offer anything else?
Yeah, I actually do. We just got through a pandemic, right? I know for where I live in Seattle, Washington, the biggest complaint that my friends and family had were, oh my God, my kids are at home and they are under my skin. But then you go out to places in the middle of Africa, some places even in the United States, some underdeveloped countries, the kids didn't go to school. Telemedicine wasn't available. Being able to run diagnostics, I mean, the amount of technology that's being, created today that could be enabled if you had a platform like 5G and private networks in those rural areas is amazing. You see large corporations today, whether it's in, agriculture, mining, oil and gas, they're building all of this technology for predictive maintenance and things like that. And how do you collect all of that data? By having private 5G or 5G capabilities in those areas connected with something like a micro-edge data center to be able to process these things really enables people to get the data that they need in order to make decisions.
Sorry to interrupt, look, I certainly see the value of connectivity in all over the world. What I don't understand is why that needs to be 5G or why it needs to be private 5G.
Not everything needs to be 5G if it's just regular connectivity. But if you're trying to do something that requires data to be moved at a very high speed, then 5G is the way to go right now. And whether you do that through public access to it or private network where you want things in your control, that's really the use case that we want to look at.
So, can I add a bit? I think to answer your question, first we need to understand what a private network is. So, private network, to start with, can be on 4G, on 3G, on 5G. And a private network is you bring the core to the edge, you do the compute locally, you do the processing locally, so you do 70 to 80% of your use case processing computing locally, and then you backhaul only what you need to backhaul back. So you don't end up using so much transmission, whether it's a fiber, whether it's microwave, whether it's satellite, whether it's whatever. So you do everything locally. Now, why do you want to do everything locally? Is because there are use cases that you need to do everything locally. It's if you're flying drones for inspection, you need to do it locally. If you're digitizing...
Sorry, Ellie, you need to do that locally because the latency is too long?
Because of the latency, yes. So sending data back and forth will not work.
Well, the drones won't go where you want them to go because they're taking too many milliseconds.
If you're doing whatever anti-corrosion use cases for oil and gas, vibration use cases, you do everything locally. You send whatever you need to send back to headquarters or back to shore or wherever you want to do it. So that's to start with why private network is born. And then whether it's 4G or 5G, one element that people don't know is that 5G, if you take the price per gigabit or a price per megabit or terabit or whatever, 5G is 20 times cheaper. Because 5G, you can buy much more capacity. And when you go to the likes of the Ericsson, Nokia, Huawei, etc., vendors who are selling you 5G, you are buying more capacity for less. So 5G costs less than 4G cost per megabyte or per gigabyte. And then you need this. So that's where 5G can make more sense than 4G. Then there are use cases that are only enabled by 5G, that are not enabled by 4G. Today we're talking a lot with the DOJ, SEC in the US, and there are lots of use cases for military that are not enabled by 4G, that you need 5G to be able to work on those use cases. There are use cases in Industry 4.0. You spoke about factories. When you move OT processes, when you move IT processes, you can do them in 4G, 5G, even in 3G. Like when you automate, you used to do things in paper, and now you automate it, and you do it with the iPad or with whatever. You can do it with a private network on even 2G or 3G, it doesn't matter. But if you're going into OT, automating OT processes, like take an oil and gas rig, and you have an OT process that is done by ABB. Today, for example, we partner with ABB and with Aker BP to really automate one of the OT processes that ABB does on the oil rig. So this is like complicated stuff that is previously all wired. And now all of a sudden you want to make it wireless and you want to move it into a private network setup. Then you need 5G because you need very low latency and you need very high speed. So that is why then you need more 5G. So to summarize, any new investment, it's less costly to do it in 5G than in 4G. And then you open for a much easier future because you have more capacity and then you can enable many more use cases.
I'm glad we've got an engineer sitting up here. Thank you. That's a helpful explanation. So you very articulately explained the benefit of a private 5G network in those particular cases where you really need the low latency and the high throughput. But is it going to be limited to those, or I guess you're saying they're going to build it and they will come? You know that there's going to be things we can't imagine now, that just like 4G enabled things we didn't imagine at the time. Is that? So you just have the faith that you improve the technology and something else. You know, people have come up with brilliant ways to use it.
Yeah, well, there are two ways.
I agree with that. No, go ahead.
There are two ways of doing it. You have one way that you build the network and then things will happen. And usually you do this on a macro network environment. You don't do it on a private setup. When you do it on a private setup, you do a business case based on 2-3 use cases that would make it break even or make money out of it. And then the rest will come and then will be on top. So because there are so many things we don't know today what 5G can enable. And then there are things that you know. You can build the business case on those, and then only on those you can break even. So we have many now in my company, we have many private network businesses, contracts, only enabling 3 or 4 use cases. And then any other use case will be an add-on. So
I agree as well. 5G is just part of the solution. You know, it's 5G and the compute capabilities that are connected with that will bring on new technologies as you learn more. Being able, as Ellie was bringing up earlier, to do compute on-prem, to manage AI. And we all know industry is moving towards AI. You can't do that in a very large, data center. That needs to be moved closer and closer to that end user. And as you enable these technologies, you find more and more use cases. just how technology works.
And that's very exciting, and it's why I'm a telecoms lawyer myself, because I think that you get all these exciting things happening all the time. But the problem with 5G, and I've spent some time talking to people in the mobile industry, and of course I don't think there's many mobile operators represented at this conference, but without putting a value judgment on it, their complaint is often that they're expected to invest billions of dollars in building these wonderful new networks without it being very clear who's going to use it. And then when someone does invent something brilliant to do with it, like Facebook has, they're the ones that take the money. They get the profit out of it, and it's the mobile operators that are investing the billions and taking all the risk. Is that, so it occurs to me as we're talking, private 5G networks are an exception to that, because there you're only going to build it if the oil company or the port or the factory is going to fund the construction of that network. That doesn't apply to 5G more generally. So I think there's a problem, isn't there? Or am I wrong? Am I thinking about this wrong?
Well, I think the telco industry's already invested a lot of money putting that infrastructure in place, getting them to places that they can enable the use of that infrastructure is what we're really focused in on. So, those investments, the way we look at it at Mangata is that, we work with telcos to extend their services to wherever they want to extend it to. We look at their use cases, we work with them, and then we don't really charge them a CapEx type of, for us to set up that system for them, because we will get those revenues as they get revenue. So you look at things in a partnership, and that's how we look at it at Mangata. I can't talk for the other operators out there, but when you work together, you just unlock so much that's out there, and that's capability, but also revenue. I mean, I'll be quite honest, I spent 30 years in the investment banking industry, and now I'm part of the telco world with satellite communications and stuff, and I left for a reason. The opportunity that's out there at this stage of this industry is about ready to open up even bigger than what it currently is today.
Anything, Ellie?
I think every operator has their own legacy network and their own subscriber base, their own ARPU to justify or not 5G, as you were saying before, on a macro level. When it comes to private networks, and if I talk about us as an operator, we will not roll out a blanket 5G everywhere. So we will only put 5G where it's needed. And when there is a private network set up and where we can break even or make money on the business case, like I said, just digitizing 1, 2, or 3 use cases, then that's what we will do. And otherwise, we will not do it.
I see. Yeah, interesting. So the other topic that was put on the agenda that's as part of to be part of our discussion is neutral host facilities. Now, maybe the first thing is to turn to the engineer and say, can you explain to the simple non-engineers here what's the neutral host facility and why is it relevant to a discussion on private 5G networks?
At risk of not offending any of telcos that are sitting out there, it is a facility that is basically neutral from any telco. It's as simple as that.
So what kind of facility are we talking about? We're talking about telecoms infrastructure. We're talking, yeah.
It's an infrastructure that can exist in order to provide connectivity, whether it's through 5G, 4G, or whatever, that is not bound to any one company.
A duct and some fibers and some antennas and satellite dish.
It can be.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Right.
It can be.
And so it's relevant to private 5G because you'd use the neutral host facility to set up your private 5G network?
Thanks for letting me answer this question, Ellie. Having multi-tenants being able to pitch in together in order to set up a facility that they both can or multiple people can benefit from is very efficient from the end user perspective. you're cutting your CapEx, by the amount of people that are using it, and then the OpEx that comes out is also beneficial. So by having that infrastructure in place, that is something that people are looking into. The issue that you have today is that, spectrum's controlled by, it's not freely accessible all of the time, and until those things get addressed, then, this neutral site is a dream, and it can be a reality in some places, but in some areas, getting spectrum and you're not a large, multinational telco doesn't happen. Just being honest.
And anything to add, Ellie?
Well, we don't, at least in Tampnet, we don't think about neutral host. We are an operator, and then we like to serve many tenants with our network. So we can provide a private network to some of the assets that exist offshore, like oil and gas platforms or wind farms or etc. And at the same time, with the same infrastructure, we will provide a public network for roaming and for us. And at the same time, we can provide also an APN or a slice to some drilling rigs that come and go. And at the same time, we can resell some of our capacity to resellers so that they resell to the maritime segment. So we don't really believe in the neutral hosting, but we believe in a more multi-tenant type of networks.
So you may not believe in it, but what you've just described kind of sounds a bit like a neutral host to me.
Then we are a neutral host as well, so it's fine. You can call us whatever.
But let's be clear, especially since we're talking specific about our company like you just did. At Mangata, of course, our preference is always to work with the telcos in order to extend their services. We're not looking to compete against anyone. We don't want to own the end customer. We want to enable telcos to get to the people that they can't get to. However, I want to be clear here. However, there are areas where the telco just might not want to go, and they don't see an upside in going there. And it makes sense. We're all, running a business, and we have to answer to our shareholders. But, there are opportunities for companies like ourselves to be able to provide services to people that we're not really looking to make any money from, but also because we're just trying to do our social good aspect of it, and being able to host a neutral, site that can then provide services to people like that is something that we would explore.
Okay, I have some more we can talk about, but I thought I'd pause and see if anyone in the audience wants to ask anything, interject anything. Yeah, there's someone with his hand up over there. Hi.
Hi, I'm John Celentano, business editor at Inside Towers. If I may offer a perspective, neutral host, as I understand it, is not so much referring to the facilities, but who owns and operates the facilities on behalf of a client or a private network. So for instance, the operator, mine, factory, an enterprise could own and operate its own network, private network, with dedicated spectrum, dedicated facilities, dedicated devices, or it could rely on a third party, the neutral host, to do that for them for a fee, right? So really, my question, Ellie, if you would, you describe what you do as kind of a neutral host. You build a network and operate it on behalf of a client or a company, is that right? Or do you build it and turn it over to them and they operate it themselves?
No, it's the first. Okay. We don't do the second. We are not a system integrator or a rollout type of company. We are an operator, so we would operate it for them.
For a fee?
Yeah, you can call it you operate it for a fee, or you can even extrapolate it to say any operator like AT&T or Verizon, they operate for a fee also. So we operate for a fee.
But you're the intermediary. The carrier doesn't operate the network for the customer. Your company does. Is that right?
Correct. We operate.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're the neutral host.
That's great. I'm happy.
There you go.
We wear many hats. Some people would say that Tampnet is a private network company, even that like covering 250,000 square kilometers is a private network for them.
Okay.
No problem. Some will say you're an operator. No problem. Now neutral host also.
It's all the same, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you.
No,
thank
thanks.
you. Thanks for the contribution. And I think the person next door, next to you. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Barlow Keener with Womble Dickinson. I'm an attorney. So I keep hearing about private networks and, what's sort of the division between CBRS private networks and non-CBRS when you hear the term private networks? Because I understand that they're
Sorry,
operating
could you put the microphone a bit closer to your mouth, please? I'm finding it a bit hard to hear you. Sorry.
You couldn't hear me? What's it, Barlow Keener, Womble Dickinson. So what's the difference between private networks that are on CBRS, sort of, what's the divider, and non-CBRS private networks? Because I understand, the carriers say, oh, AT&T, I don't know, it's them, or T-Mobile, we're offering private networks. Is that on their spectrum, in their radios, just sliced off, or is that on CBRS and other spectrum?
Sorry, what is CBRS?
CBRS, it's what was sold in the auction for 3.5 to 3.57. So it was
So it's a spectrum band.
3.55 to 3.7. Yeah.
No, it's actually CBRS is a different frequency, as you just said, and it used to be unlicensed spectrum before, and you can offer private networks on CBRS, or you can offer private networks on 3.5, or you can offer private networks on 700, or whatever you want. But usually, you want to offer private networks is private network in 3.5 and lower, because that penetrates much more, and you want to keep the frequency band 700, 800, etc., to propagate more for the macro network. So you usually use macro network for propagating, and CBRS or 3.5 or whatever for just private network or FWA to replace like fixed wireless access or these kind of use cases.
So that brings us back to a point you made a few minutes ago, Jerome. You said that a scarcity of spectrum is a constraint, as I understand, if I'm paraphrasing what you said. The difficulty in getting spectrum licenses is an obstacle to expanding some of this wonderful technology. If I guess, have I summarized you right? And if so, could you expand on that a bit?
It's not the scarcity of spectrum, it's who owns the spectrum and who has the ability to buy that spectrum. In certain areas, it's pretty open. In certain areas, it's really restrictive. Don't make me elaborate more than that.
No. So you mean if you want to operate your own 5G private network, you need spectrum and you need a license to do that. And in some cases, if you're in the middle of the ocean, it's easy. Presumably, there's no one you need to get a license from if you're not in the territorial waters of any country, Tampnet. But if you're in the territorial US, then you need FCC authorization, and that's not easy. Is that have I understood right?
You need to have the spectrum, the terrestrial spectrum, in order to create the 5G network.
I think it's to the comment before. In some countries, the regulators have sliced some of the spectrum for industries to purchase it. So you have some industries who have purchased the spectrum and who want someone to come build the network for them, and they want to operate it, and that's good.
Do you know which countries?
Well, Germany is one, France is another one. I think Brazil is doing this now, and others. And then you have in other countries where it's not yet there. I believe that spectrum will become more and more accessible. You will trade spectrums. You have operator number 3, number 4 in the countries who would want to rent you spectrum for cheap. I think that spectrum will evolve as everything else. But for 5G to be really unlocked, you need the spectrum to become cheaper and more accessible. Then you need the CPEs and the devices to be cheaper also, because you're connecting things and not only people. So those things that you're connecting, they need to have sensors, or you need to have them becoming at a low price point where you can do the connectivity. And then you need, to your point before, you need to have the business case to stand on its own. So like every technology, with time, it goes down. If you compare 5G today and you want to buy 5G equipment today compared to 5 years ago, you buy it much cheaper.
I see. You mentioned the need to make spectrum available, and it's interesting. It's an interesting thought to me because Ofcom in the UK, their theory for years has been, well, if you make it tradable, then whoever can value it the most will buy it, and you'll have all these wonderful innovative uses, whether it's private 5G networks or whatever it is. They haven't, as far as I know, allocated it specifically for particular industries in the way you've described as in other countries like Germany and France. But yet, spectrum trading is still very unusual, at least it is in the UK, and the UK has been a place where they've tried to pioneer it. So something's gone wrong, it seems to me. Am I right about that? Has something gone wrong, and what should the regulator do?
I'm not sure how it is in the UK. I think that moving forward, regulators will adjust, and the spectrum will become more and more available. The industries put pressure on the regulators and on the governments to make spectrum available. That's how it was in Germany, because they wanted to own their own spectrum. They don't want to rely on the big operators to provide them connectivity.
I see. Obviously, the risk is that the regulator makes the wrong decision. You know, they allocate the wrong amount of spectrum to the wrong industry, and it doesn't get used efficiently. But you know, if it's not being traded otherwise, then maybe that's the second best alternative. Yeah, I don't know. Jerome, are there any other obstacles to the rollout of this technology that aside from making sure spectrum's available, that you think are important, or is that the only one that really matters?
It's the obstacle that stands in the way is basically just humans themselves. You know, the infrastructure's there. We need to come up with the use cases. We want people to be able to enable those technologies that they're creating. It's really just finding that path in order to really unlock everything. I don't see a lot of obstacles in the way.
Okay, that's exciting. So I think we've just got a couple of minutes left. There's a gentleman at the front. I'm not sure whether...
I'd like to commend Mike for all your questioning, because these are exactly the questions of those who would eventually benefit from the technology. I'm chairman of Now Telecom, Mel Velarde. I know Jerome. There are millions and millions of private networks today that enterprises have built, and they're running on Wi-Fi or landline, okay? The problem with Wi-Fi, there's no SLA. However, there is Wi-Fi 6E and Wi-Fi 7 coming. So if it's just a small area for private network, it will do. But for 4G, like mining companies now, you have Komatsu vehicles that dive into caves unmanned. You need 4G or 5G with low latency for those vehicles to communicate. That's how we're running 5G, private 5G now in mining companies, and that's our business. We're waiting for Jerome to launch his satellite, because that will provide now a direct backhaul. My question to Ellie is this. Core networks. You have the traditional Nokia, Ericsson, Samsung, and ZTE, and Huawei. Then you have the Open RANs initiative, where you have Mangata, Parallel Wireless, which is really the flagship of the Americans to dominate 5G, or the Western world to dominate 5G, as Huawei dominated 3G and 4G. What can you say about the Open RAN initiative now? The Rakuten of Symphony, GU of India, and you have Dish, who's really deploying massively Open RAN. And the reason why I raise Open RAN, you can call up now Amazon, you can order CBRS radio and put up your
CBRS private network. But later on, it will be an Open RAN core. So I want to hear from you.
Yeah.
What do you
Thanks for
think?
the question and for the comment. And I think this will be the last,
You want me
response.
to? Oh, yeah.
Yes.
No, thanks for the question. So there's Open RAN, Open Core, right? It's two different things. Or or Cloud Core, or some of them called Cloud RAN as well. If we start with the core, this is more mature, and this is much easier to cloudify than the RAN. So what happens there? You have all the newcomers that are there, like Affirm, Mavenir, and others who have who can bring you the core to the edge, and then you have like a small data center on each private network on the edge, and then you have the big ones who have also now come up with. Everyone has a different name, like the Ericsson, Nokia, and Huawei. They have different names for a smaller core that can also be deployed to the edge, etc. So everyone is adjusting to this. So that's on the core side, and I think that that's already evolving, and that's already in process, from the blades to cloudifying. Then Open RAN is a bit more difficult, because if you go more technically on the RAN, you have the baseband and the radio, and Open RAN is really splitting the baseband and the radio, and then going multi-vendor to slash the cost, and then to open for other vendors than the traditional ones. There, today, Open RAN is, so what you save with the multi-vendor, you spend it on integrating the baseband and the radio, if it's two different vendors. And it needs to be pre-integrated, and it needs to work. So if I comment about Tampnet, we would not go Open RAN now, because we are not a big operator like Verizon or AT&T or etc. that have hundreds of people who can test Open RAN and make sure that for us, it's not mature yet, and we prefer to still go with the same vendor on baseband and radio. And then in the future, when Open RAN becomes more and more mature, and when the cost for this integration goes down, then we can go more and more into Open RAN.
Thank you, Eli. I think that we are out of time. So please, ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking our fireside chatters in the normal way. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much to Mike for the questioning. And Jerome, Ellie, thank you very much for taking part, and the audience, thank you for joining us and for asking the questions too. If you hang around for just a few more minutes, we've got a panel brought to you by Lightstorm. Looking forward to this one, so please stick around with us. Thank you.